Voilà. Voilà, and with this, let's have a quick look at the agenda for today. Similarly to previous webinars, we will go through an extra iteration on the two models, but this time really focusing on the issues that have been raised on GitHub. And with that, I would like to thank all the people who contributed during previous webinars through GitHub and took really the time to describe some issues they have with the current model. So thank you for that. And then so we will do that for the public organization and public service models, starting with public service today. Then we will have, similarly to last time, some breakout sessions where we would like to focus on cardinalities and definitions, but we'll come back to that. And before getting to the next steps and conclusion for today. So as usual, in the next slide, we have some rules for interacting. If you are not speaking, please mute your microphone. But I see that everyone is muted, so I don't see why I need to repeat that. If you want to speak, you can raise your hand, and in the chat there is always a possibility, if someone else is speaking, to raise some extra questions, or simply to contribute via +1, -1 to questions we will ask. Good. So as mentioned, the objective is really to review together the changes made in the two models and discuss some outstanding issues. And to really give you an understanding of, okay, what's the planning for the next steps as well. And yeah, if you remember the process that we have been through in the past month, we started from the two models at European level, CPS-VAP and CPOV. We basically looked at some use cases and information we would like to see in the models at Belgian level. And then internally, we did some mappings also with models used at regional levels in Belgium. And then in the past two workshops, we really started discussing the first iterations of the models, the first propositions, and progressively we are together improving the model to a version that is more stable, more mature. And that's the idea of today and of the next workshop. Because if we look in the next slide, if we look at the next as from the next workshop, we would like next webinar, we would like to launch really the formal public review, which normally will last approximately a month and a half. And the idea after the public review is really to finalize the models so that they can be published online for further reuse. So that's approximately in a nutshell the status and the process. With that, I propose that we directly go to the content, the core of today, starting with public service. My colleague Louis Mata will describe you with public services the key changes we have made based on our discussion of the last webinar. And based on that, we will dive into the outstanding issues.
Okay, so first we will dive on public service. So this is the updated model, but since it's not really convenient for you to look at that, I will just go through the main changes. So then not a lot of changes since last webinar, since we have not really discussed about public service. But we have changed the naming as it was mentioned last time. We have changed previously the agent class and agent class to better naming, to profile and agent profile. And the second second thing we discussed was the link between output and evidence, because some public service use their own output as evidence when it's a long-running public service. That's why we have added a relationship is used as in order to tackle this issue. So yes, as I mentioned, so better naming for profile and agent profile, and adding a relationship between output and evidence. Now I will just deep dive into the issues of GitHub, because some of them are really interesting for you to discuss, and we would like your point of view in order to really have the best of it. So there are some of them here, 8 in total, and I would like to have your point of view because some of them need some debate. So the first one here, it was that the agent profile is missing. So basically, according to this issue, the model lack to describe some specific profile of agents, such as students or SMEs. And the person that raised this issue said that some agent class could be used. So here it's the profile class because we changed the naming. The definition of this class is a group of agent. So in order to tackle this issue, we have proposed to, so as mentioned, to add the agent class. But we would like for you to think about whether this solution is good for the model, whether it tackled this issue, especially the one that raised this issue, or whether we should maybe add something or change something in the model. So can you speak up if necessary?
Yep, Bernard.
Hello, everyone. I was the one raising the issue, so I am kind of compelled to explain myself. As I was saying, for our use case, we need to be able to link public service, not merely to a specific person or a specific company, but to categories or profiles of people, profiles of companies. Like, for example, if you are a butcher, you need a license or a credential. Well, if you want to find in a database the relevant information, you will have to provide the notion of butcher, and the output would be the required procedures. So that was the main point. And as I was saying it, the agent class was pointing to a specific person or a specific entity and not a generic category of people or of legal entities. So I proposed to add alongside the agent class a sub or meta entity, which would be the profile of that agent. But here, what I am saying is that you have made two changes. If I understand correctly what you propose, you changed agent towards agent profile, and you also added a profile class. So I am questioning this. Isn't it too overkill to tackle the issue? Because if you render or if you make the former agent class more generic, it's sufficient. You don't need to add another profile to it to my opinion, or else you have to explain a little bit more the relation and the exact scope of those two classes that you propose here.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, we don't need the agent class, but only the agent class. So a group of agents is just necessary for you.
For my use case, yes.
Yes. And does everyone agrees to this one? Do we don't need the agent profile here? Is someone willing to keep this class for certain reason?
Yep.
I was thinking, how does this differ now from how it was before? Are we rolling it back, or?
I think, yeah. So in a nutshell, the proposition is we basically keep agent or agent class, but we actually, what is important is the definition that we have behind. And the comment from Bernard is that we actually don't need to know if it's a Jane or company X that is doing something specific. So the agent, but what we need to know is the type of profile, the profile of that company. Like,
okay, yeah, okay, it's clear. Yeah.
And so we would keep only the profiling part, even though we are still looking into the best option to do that. Is it DCT agent class? That's a question we still have, and where we will make a clear proposition.
And is in this, I'll put my camera on. Is in this situation the concept of profile preferred instead of, I don't know, type, or is type something you'd rather not use? Because I think it's maybe Bernard, if you would agree that agent type speaks more to the audience, I think, than profile, or is profile the term that is used for this in these kind of models?
I'm not really good into semantics, so I will not go into the debate of naming things. But the idea is that maybe another important point is that you might have several profiles as a person. You might be a student and I don't know, a landlord or something like that, and so the relationship, the cardinalities need also to be clear between public service and profile, because you might have several ones of them. In our model, we need the term public cible, so target, to describe this concept. So it's also maybe something to consider, but to me, the names don't really matter if the ideas behind them are clear.
But with cible, you literally mean the service is aimed at,
yes,
cible, aimed at a student, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, it's a good point.
Anne?
Yeah, I wonder, is it a problem? You say that adding agent as well might be an overkill, but is it actually a problem? Because if you know the profile of your target group, then it might also be useful, perhaps, to also know the agents who compose the target group. For instance, for later administration, like if you want to know how many agents are concerned by if some public service would change, or to be able to consider the impact of a certain decision. regarding changes of public services and so on. I don't know if it's really a problem that you would add an agent as well.
First, it's not, but I see, yeah, Bernard, you want to answer?
My point was not to suppress entirely the agent concept, because I understand that in some use cases, it might be very useful. For example, if you are dealing with process management and you want to apply the model to actual transactional processes in e-government, you need to be able to link the actual procedure with someone who is doing it. My point was to make sure that we have some generic entity above that that can be used to make the information findable to specific categories of people who will name themselves and describe themselves with some kind of profiles and types, and the information must be linked to that generic information. So that was really my point. So I am a little bit. If you say Florian and Louis, if you say agent profile, you really mean the former agent class that was described before. It's just renaming, so the concepts are the same. So if I understand correctly, the proposal that I was making in the issue on GitHub is correctly addressed in this proposal. And we have best of both worlds, both the ability to describe a specific application of the service, of the procedure to someone, and also a generic description of the cases or the profiles of the situation to where it might be useful.
Okay, so we will keep the model as it is, right?
To me, it's good.
Okay.
Pascal, you raised your hand.
Yes, I have. I was triggered by what Bernard said about their use of the concept cible, which I think it's quite interesting. I think we would solve this in the current version of the model using the participation clause, if I'm not mistaken. There's no direct link between public service and the profile, so I'd guess you'd have the participation class as the one where you describe which kind of profiles that you target, but it might not be clear now, like in this model now, which profile is actually the target one. That might be something we might take as a note later on when we look at the relationships, that we can somehow mark or highlight who is the primary target profile, for instance. I think it's quite interesting idea.
Yeah, and probably to answer that, Pascal, that's something on which we need to work as well on our side, and probably the best way to address it is to make it explicit is to create an example. So
sure, yeah,
probably something we will do in the coming weeks and share either in the next webinar or beforehand with the group. I think this will make things clearer, and we will more easily see if there is an issue with the current way of modeling.
yeah.
Okay, so if everyone agrees, we'll keep the model as it is, and we'll go to the next issue. So the next issue was from which side should a public service be described? So basically, the issue was, if I understand it correctly, that we have two kinds of description possible. One more user-friendly, user-oriented, and more administration oriented. So in order to tackle these issues, as advised in GitHub, we added the alternative name attribute. as opposed to the name attribute of in the public service class. Basically, a name would be like the normal name, the formal name of a public service, more administration oriented, while alternative name was more user friendly. But we still have some questions about this issue, because we would like to know whether it's sufficient to add only these attributes, or maybe we need to go a little bit further and add more attributes to public service class, or maybe to other classes. So it was the first one. And the second one was still in the same issue, was adding the purpose of a public service. Because the purpose can vary from the orientation of the description, because the purpose for a user to have a permit is to do something thanks to it. And for a government, it's not the same, because it's to govern, limit, or protect something. So our second question was the purpose of adding the purpose of a public service, was that overlapping with or complementary with what we proposed? And would like also some clarification on it in order to better assess what can we propose on that. So can you maybe
Let's start, Louis, maybe with the second part, meaning like for the purpose, should we tackle it as a separate issue, or for you are both complementary? Yeah, Pascal, you created the issue. Go ahead.
I think it's a good point, but I think we should first look at the original issue raised by Bernard, which is a bit fundamental to solving the rest. Are you describing the public service from the user perspective or from the administration perspective? I think that leads the question on how you can make the model better. So I can imagine that adding an alternative name, if it continues to be administrative talk, then it wouldn't be any more clear to the user. And the second point is it's about the consumer provider perspective. That also can only be, we can start to tackle that once we've decided on from which perspective do we describe the service. But that's my point of view on this.
Yeah, because, so let's start with the perspective, and then we'll see about the purpose.
Because if I can add, it's also related to the life cycle. There's the life cycle status code to the consumer. That's quite. If you have like 3 big steps in the handling of a service request, you can make it simple for the requester to say this is the status of your request, but it can be a lot more complex from the internal perspective. Not only the status, but also the link with legal stuff and outputs, etc. And different actors playing parts.
Yep. Good. Yep. So let's start with, Bernard, I'll give you the word in a second. Let's start with, indeed, the discussion on the 2 perspectives that we see here. Go ahead.
Okay. I really think that, to me, we would need 2 sets of descriptions. That would be the most convenient. Only one would be required. But with my experience, I don't see how we can reconcile description from a public internal point of view or from the user's point of view. I can tackle the issue from everywhere. I don't see how we can reconcile the description and the wording used on one side or another. However, both descriptions describe the same reality, so should be related. I'm not sure that only an alternative text or name would be enough. It's an interesting solution, and we use it in our own systems. We have 3 sets of names actually for one public service, but it's our system is not used generically. It's only used to describe the user's perspective, and we have alternatively an internal name, but we don't have an internal description. So it's only a matter of for the internal people from the inside to recognize what we are talking about more easily. But it's not we could not use this, for example, for process modeling or anything like this. So it's very limited in scope. If we want to really address both sides of the iceberg, as I say, the emerge side of the iceberg, the top side is the user's point of view, and the downside of the iceberg is the administrations and process point of view. We really need, if we want, is the purpose is this, we need 2 sets of descriptions, to my opinion.
Thanks. Anne, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I agree with Bernard. I think if we're talking about service, you need to adopt the point of view of the user. So that's the main perspective. And perhaps public organizations don't always think that way. But if we don't do it yet, we should learn how to adopt the user's perspective. But for internal processes, it's true that the administrative or administration-oriented description is useful as well. So as preferred label, I would take the user-oriented one, and then as alternative internal label, the administration-oriented can be useful as well. So basically, I agree with Bernard.
Okay, good. Pascal, you also raise your hand, and then maybe let's ask also the rest of the audience. Yep.
Yeah, same here. I think it's right. I'm a big proponent of having a machine-readable description in a detailed one from an internal perspective. But I agree that it would be overkill to try to have them in one model, both the user and the consumer and the provider perspective. And also, like Anne said, I think what Anne wants to say is that the priority should be on the user perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So
that also, or what I also wanted to mention, I added also in the review the notion of the goal and the not what the consumer tries to achieve, but also what the administration wants to perceive
to achieve. Yeah.
to achieve. That is also that can be, that might also be interesting from a consumer perspective. So that's maybe not something we need to throw away because it might be interesting to see on which levels of the administrations common goals are trying to be achieved, and that's also information that is interesting to the community, to society.
Yeah, and that's my understanding is what you propose through also the concept of purpose. Yeah. Well, and so let's. I see the link, but let's tackle it maybe right after. And first, ask the rest of the audience. I saw also Olivier putting a +1 in the chat. So I understand that. Oh, yeah. Let's ask the question. Do you agree that the initial focus is on the end user perspective? Yeah, thanks, Anne, for the additional comment. Okay, so I see only plus ones, so that's already one thing. And then for the connection, what Bernard explained, that he doesn't see how to make the connection easily made. I know that right now we have two relationships, requires and related to self relationships that are displayed on the screen. That represent a way to link public services between each others. Meaning that if from an end user perspective, you have one big public service that you would like to describe in with a language that is understandable by anyone that would require this service, that's one thing you could do. And then there is a possibility to also describe extra public services that are required in order to obtain this service. And you can decide whether you want to describe them for the end user or more internally. That's also a possibility. I'm not saying it's perfect, huh? But what do you think about this? Yeah.
I think that would make matters complex from the point of view of the public. I think you need to have a single door for to have one of your aims achieved as a citizen or a company.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be even if it's in the backend an orchestration of several services that also can be accessed one by one. I think there should be one grouping service exposed as well to the public. But that's a matter of taste, of course.
Yep. And Bernard?
Of course, metadata about public service and classification is really key to make them findable. For example, if you say the service of having a reduction of tax if you are a disabled driver, if you buy a new car, well, it should be accessible from the I am a driver perspective, and also I am a disabled person perspective, and also maybe from a tax perspective, and maybe from a mobility perspective. So you must have several classification possibilities. And it's also, I also relate to the purpose proposition. It's also valid for the internal administration. For example, in our system, we are starting now to have a really big mass of public service described. So we are starting to use them as a kind of a dashboard system for the internal of how well our services are doing. And also, of course, you need also kind of specific classification that makes sense for the internal. But I would make it really generic possibilities of grouping rather than having specific types of categories that are predefined. I think that, well, we need to be very flexible on how we want to group things, and we need to have everything to be able to do that, but also it must be loose enough to address any future use case of kind of grouping, of categorizing or describing with metadata the services.
And how would you do that? Basically, because if I understood you correctly, the type attribute of public service is not enough. How would you do that? Maybe a class categorization of public service would do the job, or do you think of something else?
In our system, I can only say how we do it. We have a generic type of classification and with itself a type attribute. So we can define types of classification, and within those types we can create any item that we need. So, for example, we addressed with this, for example, the target that we talked about earlier. Well, we have that as a classification, and within the target classification, we can create any category: citizen, company, student, whatever. But we also, for example, have we say a compétence in French, a competency, or really big thematic areas of public action, and it's rather internal, and we use them also competence, and we have like social affairs and fiscality and everything, and we can also create items in those, and we link public services to the relevant categories, and we create and add or suppress categories kind of on the fly whenever we need it.
Yep.
And we also have another property of those items is we can relate items to one another as a parent-child relationship. So, for example, you might have the student category, which is a child of the citizen category, and you could also have the medical student category as a subcategory of a student. And with those basic items, we cover basically any grouping or categorizing need that we can have.
Yeah, because, for example, right now we have, you can see on the screen, thematic area, and on the back end, this points to a generic class for all classifications. And I know that this is something that CPSVEP is proposing in general, really integrating within the model a generic way of adding classifications. So would this be a solution?
Yes, it's not really in the model right now, but I understand that it's behind that line. So yes, basically it's enough to cover a vast majority of use cases related to this issue.
So if we add, so we removed it initially. We had this generic class. We removed it for simplicity because it raised questions from the working group. But so if now the working group agrees and thinks it's useful to have it, it's of course fine by us, and that would be our initial proposition to put it back.
I would insist on being able, because thematic area is already a definition of a kind of category. So I would insist on making it very generic and to be able to create different classifications to serve any need that might appear, rather than narrowing down the possibilities and naming thematic area and target public and maybe administrative thematic area. And if you narrow it down to a few, you limit yourself for what you could do in the future, because to our experience also, those kind of classification, they can emerge also from the users themselves, and we cannot really predict as to where it will go in the future. It can evolve.
I see also in the chat the comments, and then I give you the floor, Pascal. I see the comments from Svetlana. mentioning that creating categories or groups on the fly gives a lot of problems in reports and statistics. I think we all agree with that. But it's not because you give the possibility from a modeling perspective to do it that it should be done in all directions. Huh? So let's differentiate.
Yeah, but I hear Bernard just saying it also can come from the users, for example. I think if you're doing that, then you need to be really aware that you have also lots of, you have to make some good, I don't know, some kind of
Guidelines?
policy about that, and you just don't. It's very difficult to handle that afterwards too in reporting.
Yeah. Once it's created, it's difficult to revert back to something structured.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Svetlana. Pascal?
Yeah, I'm with Svetlana, but I also understand Bernard's concern. We've all seen lists of with permitted values. I can't remember seeing one for public service. That probably exist, and that they can be hundreds of entries in there, and still you don't find the one that you actually need. But the issue raised by Svetlana is also correct. If you're trying to make comparisons, for instance, on which is one of the use cases I think that was originally raised to see what kind of public services on different levels, administration levels, are being provided, then if you don't have some kind of standard list, then it becomes difficult. I think that's what Svetlana also means with reporting and statistics and making comparisons. So it's a universal problem. We've all dealt with that. We need some kind of standardization, but you need some kind of flexibility. I don't have an answer to that, but it would be, I don't know if there's work going on in there, types of public services, but we should at least have a way to guide the users of this model to work from a standard list and work from there.
Yep. I'm not aware at Belgian level of one entity responsible for any type or for type of classifications, but we could raise a GitHub issue as a placeholder for you to indicate certain classifications that you are using or list of classifications that you are using. But let's also be honest, this is not a small work. If we need to start harmonizing the classifications, it's a bigger work than what we are trying to achieve through this model today. Thanks, Bert, for the pointer. And Bernard, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just to wrap it up, I think I totally agree with the need for stability. I was not advocating for doing things lightly or adding or suppressing, but I think the possibility of doing it and maybe having best of both worlds. That means for some types of classification, you need very stable, controlled vocabularies and also interoperability between everyone. Basically, it's also very important for us on a Belgian level to have a common classification to better expose our service commonly to the public. It's key. And also for others, letting the possibility of adding extra things that you can do on your own side, and others don't need to bother with it, and you can kind of experiment. I think it's interesting, and the model, well, could allow it. And also, I understand. I agree with Florian when you say it's a big job to harmonize vocabularies of classification, but it's really a big added value if we can have a common vocabulary to describe or classify our services, because for the end user, it will be tremendously valuable. Because on the Belgian level, the first source of complexity is the institutional complexity, and the difficulty to kind of compare where you fall and who do you have to go to get a service. So if we have kind of common trees of classification for our public services, and we can reconcile this on a global level for the end user, I know it's a big dream, but it could also be very, very valuable to the end users and the public in general.
Yep. Let's conclude this part for now. We agreed that the focus should be on the user perspective for the different attributes of this model in general, meaning that do we keep alternative name attribute as we proposed now, or do we remove it? Can you indicate in the chat if you agree that we keep it? And put a -1 if you think it's not necessary. Yeah, Pascal.
Yes, sorry. I also raised an issue about the naming convention of the public service by itself. So if we having a good naming convention can also make an alternative name not necessary, and just a good naming convention in combination with the description of the public service can be enough to maybe the alternative name is not is maybe raising more difficulties than we try to solve with.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and the point of Ilde is also valid. The fact that we could have several names for one service. And Pascal, we have a pointer later on about the naming convention. But so I understand that your proposition, we could do both. Huh? We add the cardinality 0 to many on the existing name, and we discuss later on the naming convention to see if we can agree on something over there.
Okay, maybe we can go to the next issue then. Yes, so basically the point here was that maybe we could add a purpose to a channel, because some channel can have several purposes. So for example, you can have channel for information or to activate a public service. So that was the first issue here. In order to tackle it, we would like, as proposed in the issue, we wanted to add maybe a purpose attribute to channel, and maybe a relationship between channel and administrative territorial units, because this purpose attribute would heavily depend on this attribute, administrative territorial unit. So that was our first question. And the second one was whether we should simplify a little bit the channel class, meaning maybe delete some or all of the child classes of channel, so offline channel, website, and so on, for the sake of simplification. So do you agree with this statement? We should maybe simplify a little bit these subclasses, or not? Do you see an added value of it?
I was the one proposing the simplification of the channel hierarchy, because just when you look at the whole model, it really draws the attention to what is actually very trivial compared to all the other things that we try to do in the model. And I think it also makes the model quickly outdated in that area of the model. If we would have been here, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe, then we would have added the subclass fax, maybe. And then after 5 years, that would have been superfluous. And I see that, for instance, bot is not mentioned here. Then you would, in 5 years, you would always have to add the bot to the other electronic channel. So I don't think it's very long-term thinking of making it such a. It's typical class modeling 101. To have subclasses if you already know what the possible types could be, but just the fact that you already add other possible channel makes it a candidate to really simplify. That's my point that I want to make.
Okay, and do you all agree on that? That maybe this model can be outdated quickly, or we need to simplify this part of the model?
I see Svetlana, Bernard, Bieke, Olivier all saying or stating for simplification.
Okay, great. So I think it's we have stated on that. We will simplify this part of the model.
And there is also Louis in the chat. A question from Bieke, asking if channels can also be considered part of or related to the output.
I think the channel, if I go a little bit up, no, if you can see the output here, it's not related to channel, but it's related to
public service.
To public service, yes.
Through that, there is a connection with the output, but there is no direct relationship for now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe just to clarify. So from the point of view of the creation of archives, since we are from the state archives, for us, each of these channels create a certain series of archives, which is why I consider these to be related to the output, as they are put together in the archival series and the selection lists for archival for disposing archives. But if they are minimized in the model, it's not that important, I think.
Okay, so for you, you say it's interesting to have it, but not necessary?
Yes, I agree that for the benefits of keeping the model stable in the future, it would be better to not have the channels specified, maybe.
Yeah, so on our side, from the point right before, we will remove all subclasses of channel. But should we go further than that? Bernard, you raised your hand.
Yes, I think the point here, as I understand it, is that we don't need a predefined list of channels, but we need the information of the nature of the channel. So I wouldn't suppress those subclasses, but make it an attribute of the channel. That would be, to me, important to keep the information. And also to, I think, add up to what Beeke said. Here we are really talking about the input, so the ways the beneficiaries can make contact, if I understand correctly, rather than the output, so the outcome of the service, which is also important to define through which channels they are provided. And I want also to stress the importance of the purpose attribute, because you have several channels, and all those channels won't provide the same service, the same. They won't be. For example, if you want to make a train ride, you need to buy a ticket. You have several channels to buy the ticket, but some are preferred to others, and so there is a big relationship between purpose and channel, which must also be qualified with intensity. So this is the preferred channel, for example, for getting help on the service, and this is another channel which is possible where you can have help, but it's not the preferred one. So you need to have this kind of really granular information in order to describe everything properly. I wanted to stress that out.
Okay.
And also, I'm sorry, I don't think it's a good idea, as Hilde proposed it in the chat, to remove offline channels, because offline channels are also channels, and I don't see a really big difference between both. A same service could be rendered online or offline, and you should be able to describe them equally in the model, to my understanding.
Yes, I think but maybe I'm mistaken, but I think the point of Hilde, correct me if I'm wrong, Hilde, is that we at least remove the offline channel, but since we say that we would remove all the subclasses, I think this is part of it, and so yeah, right, that we would replace it by a type attribute that we have already actually in the channel class itself.
Yes, and we will also add the purpose attribute to channel.
And with the purpose attribute, would that be sufficient? Because Bernard, you mentioned as well the preferred channel. How would you see that here?
It should be a joint relationship between purpose and channel, with some attributes within the relationship to qualify it, which is my request. I don't know if everyone agrees, but we have been working on those trees to describe how a beneficiary can start a relationship with the administration, and what are the channels possible, and what are the preferred channels for every type of interaction, which is getting information on the service, getting the actual service, getting help on the service. So you have getting assistance. You have those several purposes, and the channel. Well, if the channel doesn't describe this correctly, we are missing something. And it's also something that is really stressed out, for example, in the single digital gateway, which you have assistance services and all those categories, and we could maybe refer to that in the concept of purpose, I would say.
Okay, so does everyone agree with adding purpose as a classification? Okay, I see some reactions.
Sorry, Bernard, what would be the types of purpose here? What would be some examples?
Well, the three examples that are the main common would be: one, getting information on the service; two, getting the actual service; and three, getting assistance on the service.
Okay.
And for those three cases, you might have different channels. For example, you could get the information on the service, you could have it online, or you could have it on a hotline on telephone, for example. You could have the service provided offline or online on a specific way, and you could also have information assistance through a chat service, or you could also go to a special place offline to have, for example, your tax form filled with some help. So all those, that reality, you need that to address the reality within the model.
Yeah, sorry, I was a bit distracted there. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, but so we'll make a proposition for the purpose code list.
Okay, I think we have tackled everything in this issue. So maybe we can go to the next one. So this point was about as contact point relationship, because according to this model, this as contact point may be superficious. And but we wonder whether we should delete or keep the as contact point relationship, because this relationship was added because we don't have a contact point class anymore, and we have changed the class to this relationship. So if we delete the as contact point relationship, we'll not have a contact point anymore. And we understood that from the first webinar that it was quite important for some of you. So we'd like to know your point of view of whether it's really necessary to have this relationship, or we need to keep it, or maybe it's superfluous. At this point, we need to delete it, or if it's really more important than just a simple relationship, we maybe need to create a contact point class. So we'd like your point of view on this issue.
Yes, Bernard, you created the issue. Yeah.
To me, the idea was not to suppress the concept. I think it's very important, but it's related to the previous issue. If we have a strong enough channel class, we can address contact point through channel. That was really my main point. Because a contact point is basically it's a way to contact the administration in relationship with the service, which is, to my opinion, the definition of a channel. So it's really a replacement, and I don't think it's superfluous in the way that it could be described with other items in the model. Maybe through adding relationship. I don't know if it exists between public organization and channel, and maybe with a specific contact point element or class that is between public organization and channel. That might be also to consider, because sometimes a contact point is something that exists in reality. You have an administration, they have a contact point, it's generic, you can contact them for a lot of purposes. So one contact point could be used for several purposes and several public services and so on, and several purposes, of course. So I advocate more for reintegration with the notion of channel rather than suppressing the notion of contact points at all.
Okay, and does everyone agree with what he said?
Any reactions? Hilda? Go ahead. Hilda, I don't know if you're speaking, because we cannot hear you.
Sorry.
Voilà.
No, the contact point class is already in the public organization or organization model.
Yes.
Indeed, yes.
So perhaps it could be added to the public service model also if extra relationships are required.
I think with the idea initially, or in past discussions, that led to removing or replacing the contact point class by a relationship here, was because it led to some confusion between how to use channel and how to use contact point in parallel or in combination. So I'm okay with, of course, adding contact point class again, but I see that maybe there's a need first to give also some examples over there on how to use both together or one and not the other. Maybe this will help the discussion or the working group to position itself. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe some examples would help because indeed contact point and channel are very similar in this.
Okay, so that's a point on us. We'll make an example, and based on that, we'll probably also share it via GitHub or via email, and to get your reactions on GitHub, that would be useful before the next webinar. Okay.
Okay, great. Maybe we can go to the next issue then. So yes, this one was about live event and business event. Because basically a live event is when a person is requesting a public service, and business event is when a company is requesting a public service. But what about other type of person or profile, such as like NGO, or what about a public organization? So maybe live event and business events might be a little bit too restrictive. And that's why, for the sake of simplification, one advice was maybe to delete business event and life event. But on the other side, if we do that, we will maybe go farther from the common public service model, CPSV AP. So what we proposed would be just to keep these two classes, business event and life event, as subclasses of event, and if needed in the later stage, in the implementation stage, some people can add classes for other type of agents. That's why we would propose to keep just a life event and business event to still be compliant with CPSV AP. But we would like, of course, your point of view on this issue.
So do you agree that we keep the two subclasses because basically it's already agreed at European level, but this doesn't hinder you from adding extra subclasses or adding extra attributes on the mother class if needed? I see some positive reactions in the chat. Okay.
Okay, good. So if everyone agrees, we will do this way, and we can go to the next issue. So basically, this issue was to clarify the dependencies in the charter, because if you go in GitHub, maybe the dependencies of each classes, so where does the definition comes from, is not really well shown. So what we would propose is maybe to clarify the naming of the sources in the model. So if you can see here, we have CPSV public service as an example. And so that means that the public service class, the definition of this class comes from CPSV AP as a model. For event, it's CCEV. So in order to tackle this issue, we would maybe modify the naming of the sources to make it more maybe more shown, well shown. And in the charter, as advised, we will add a chapter clarifying the type of dependencies. So do you agree on adding such a chapter in the charter and in the model to modify the naming of the sources?
Pascal, yeah.
I think it's a great idea to add it in the model as prefixes. But I noticed that in the generated HTML describing the model, it's not. They are not visible.
Yeah, they are not directly visible. If you hover over the concept, normally in blue, you see the URI popping up. Yeah, I agree. It's not directly visible. It's available if you want to know, but you need to know where to look.
I didn't know. I don't know if that can be noted in one of the free-form fields in the beginning, in the summary, or in the just as a notification.
And you would indicate the models that are reused, the namespaces, or really for each class which namespace is reused?
I don't know what the best practice is. It's just I think if it's I wasn't aware of that. That when you hover, you see the list. If it can't be generated automatically, maybe it would be good to just have a notification that you can.
We can see what we can do. I know that in RDF and many other data formats, when you describe it, you always start by defining the namespaces used. So that's definitely a possibility. We'll look into it.
they now became, because you put the prefixes there, they now became also clickable titles, right? It wasn't that in the previous version, I think.
Yeah, it depends, of course.
Most of them,
and
yes.
some URIs are not resolvable. Huh?
Yeah, okay.
That's also true. So sometimes it points you to an external content
Right.
from the original source. Sometimes not, depending on the availability online.
Yeah, I think this is a great fix. So I'm happy with that.
Okay. Other reaction? Yeah, Svetlana.
Yeah, I suppose that the prefix is also gonna be used in the vocabulary later. Is there gonna be a vocabulary about this data model? That are you gonna make anything that's gonna explain what the channel is, and are you gonna take the prefixes into the vocabulary? I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Not
No,
entirely.
not entirely. Okay, so at some point, are you gonna explain to the people who are gonna reading this model what you mean by channel? And if you are gonna explain that in some kind of list of vocabulary, are you gonna take the prefixes with you because you need them to make a link to the model? Because that's the point of critique that we get all the time, is that we use these prefixes too, and afterwards, when you take those to the list to explain to the broader public what do you mean by that, it's not really readable. So
sure, that's always the pros and cons. Huh? For the people who are a bit used to read specifications, it's actually useful to have the namespace, the prefix. For people who are not used to it, it's actually a bit confusing. What something we could do? Yeah, I see that Louis is opening the specification. So that's something that exists already. Huh? I don't know, Svetlana, if you have seen it. Yeah, in a second. So that's what we have prepared already, where for each element, for each concept, we have tables with different information about each concept, such as,
So-
for example, here with address, a description, a usage node, and all the properties. And under we have a table where we list all the properties of this class. And
so
what
if you are here talking about address, I see that there is no prefix. It's gonna stay like that, like in this way.
That's the current proposition, and that's what we discussed with Pascal right before. If Louis, you hover over a term, you see the prefix. So everything that is in blue has some links. Here you see, for example, the URI of administrative unit level 2, and that's the unique identifier of administrative unit level 2. The same for text. As the expected range, the expected type here in this case. And the same on the top for address, for example, for the class itself. That's where you can find directly the
link to the
voilà.
technical
It's more than the
name.
prefix, it's the URI itself of the specific term. And in many cases, they are resolvable. For example, if we click here, normally it should lead us to the W3C specification, voilà. But it's not always the case because it depends on the original source. I don't know if this makes things clear.
No, that looks good. Okay, thank you for the explanation.
No problem.
Okay, I'll come back to presentations then.
Yeah, thanks, Louis. And so we proceed with what we propose. So we, in the visual itself, we include the prefix. And of course, now you know also that in the specification, you can find back all those prefixes by clicking on the right term. And in the charter, we can also explain and clarify the types of dependencies that we have. And if there are strong dependencies or more source of inspirations, as Pascal described it on GitHub, such as the European models, it's first a source of inspiration, and then we decide if we make it a strong dependency or not, term by term. Yeah. And then, yeah, sorry. And then I noted down as well the comment from Pascal that we could add also a list of prefixes or namespaces used in the entire specification on top, or we'll see what's the best way to approach that.
Okay, maybe we can go to the next issue then. So here, the proposal was to add a relationship between output and legal resource. If you remember, we already have a relationship between legal resource and public service, but as pointed out in this comment, the legal resource that describes a public service might be different than the one that describes the output of this public service. That's why this comment advised to have an added relationship as legal resource between output and legal resource. And we added this relationship. So since this one was quite straightforward, we already added it. But do you have something, a comment that might change this addition? Or do you all agree on this relationship?
Yeah, Pascal, go ahead.
So the issue was raised by me in the process of issuing a permit, an environmental permit. The public administration will issue as output a big binder containing of specific outputs, not only the permit, for instance, but also reports that will indicate the process or will describe what has happened in terms of investigations, for instance, by environmental specialists. And those documents, special reports, are it's called MED, for instance. It describes the possible effects of an action done by the permit requester on the environment, possible effects on the environment. And those documents will need to be generated, and the documents are legally described what should be in there, and sometimes even in what format they should be provided, or how they should be signed. So not only the process itself to issue the permit has legal resources related to it, but even the specific or individual outputs. Don't know if that's an example that speaks to you.
Bernard?
Yes, thank you, Pascal, for clarifying. The example is very clear. I see another example, actually. Sometimes the output of a service is also a legal document. For example, the minister will sign off a subsidy. C'est un arrêté in French. I don't know. Okay, it might be another relationship between output and legal resource, but it's a different one than the case you explained. So we would need to deal with that possible confusion between using the relationship for two different realities, but it's possible to address it.
Yeah, I think I had a thought before that the name of the relationship has legal resources might be, in the example you're given, too vague. Sometimes you could say that a certain output is regulated by a certain legal resource. I'm not sure that's semantically the good term, but of course it would be how exhaustive can we be in the number of possible relationships. This goes for others as well. Yeah.
Yes.
But so, what do you propose that we? Because then I understand that we have basically two cases. For the second one, should we change the? Should we have another relationship then, or is it something important, or it's really specific from one implementation to another?
Aren't we now in the vague zone between describing from a consumer perspective and from an internal perspective?
Yes, as well.
Maybe we're making it from the consumer perspective a bit more complicated than it should be. I don't know.
Then the question is, should we indicate the legal resource for the output from an user perspective?
It's good documentation for really complex matters. It's important documentation. I'm sure to ask for a driving permit, you will not look up the legal resources, but I can think of a lot of other services where that will be the case.
Yeah.
By experts, of course.
Okay, and so does the group agree that we keep this this relationship, or on the value of this relationship to indicate basically what's the legal resource behind an output? Can you indicate it in the chat? Yeah. Okay, then, yeah, that's clear.
Okay.
I think we can move on indeed. Louis.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, this one was about the live status code. So first, I would like to remind you the definition of the live status code, live status attribute, as defined in the first webinar. So it refers only to the creation, the use, or the deletion of a public service. So really the life cycle of the public service itself, and not the process of a public service as seen by the user. And it was decided in the first webinar that we will not add a class, that it was previously defined before, a status class for a user perspective. But if I understood the comment correctly, yes?
Yeah, I raised this issue and I wasn't aware of the definition, so my issue doesn't hold anymore. Yeah.
Okay, but do you feel the need of a status class? Because it was put aside in the first webinar, leaving it to a more implementation work. But do you feel the need of it, or do you think it's not necessary anymore? Because we have talked about that previously, and some of you maybe felt the need of such class.
Mm-hmm. Also considering the earlier discussion we had about the user and versus administrative perspectives.
But if you're doing reporting, or just imagine a use case where you would generate a list of services, then a list of possible services and a list addressed at the public, then it could be interesting to use that lifecycle status code to either list or not list anymore a service that has been decommissioned. But that's the only thing I can think of now from a consumer perspective as a use case.
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. Bernard, you want to add something?
Yes, this status can sometimes be tricky. Let's not think that it's limited to status of in preparation, active, and decommissioned. For example, I give one example. You have some public services that are valid for a specific period of time, for example, one civil year. And for example, if you want to get money to make a transformation to your home, you can apply for the regime that correspond to the time period that you made the transformation in your home. So if you made the transformation in 2019, you can still apply in 2020 for the regime that is not available anymore in 2020, unless if it aims at transformation that you did the previous year. So it can be tricky, and so I kind of agree that the life cycle status might be a little bit limited in that use case that I'm just thinking of right now. So if the question is, should we make it more robust? Maybe, or maybe there is another way of addressing what the use case I'm just submitting. For example, I don't know, an extent to where the service can apply. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. I see in the chat that Pascal commented that for him it's not what is meant with life cycle status. It's true that what you added with the time frame is in addition to the life cycle status as we described it right before. And before giving the word to Pascal, my question would be then, do we actually need extra information on top of what we have now? And if we do, then probably we will come back to what we discussed before with the status class with extra properties. But yeah, Pascal.
What would you do with services that are only available for a specific period of time? How would we handle that? Like subsidies that are only available in a certain year or from a certain date to a certain date. Is that something you would handle with the life cycle status, or am I just making it too detailed? That's possible.
I see several options. One would be to add really dates like starting date, ending date, for example, in the public service class. Or if we want to go even more into the details, but then we really enter into the process itself. I think in Oslo we have the status class, which is a composition of public service, and the status class has also ending date, starting date types of properties.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have like the use case I mentioned. Is this service still available to me as a citizen, for instance? This particular subsidy for solar panels or something. Maybe we could consider having these dates, either adding them here or using the thing that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I see in addition, Pascal, Svetlana said, yeah, this might first make things quite complex from a modeling perspective, and also more from a perspective of the administration in the end, because you can always, as an administration, decide to to remove the service if the status is, for example, deprecated or archived. And also it requires quite some maintenance tasks to keep it valid.
I think if I understand Hilde's comment correctly, the rule class could also be an option for what we just discussed about the whether the service is still available or when it is available.
Yep. Yeah, it's valid, but then of course you also need to capture that on the rule. Huh? So meaning it might also move the discussion to under another class, but yeah, but I agree in general. Yeah. Okay, for now, do you understand correctly that we keep things simple, but don't hesitate if you see really a need for adding something, you can indicate it on GitHub. So please reflect on that if you think it's useful, and indicate it on GitHub with some examples. That would be useful. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go to the last issue. It was about the naming convention. So basically, as I understood, someone just advised to have a naming convention, but I would like to ask him maybe to rephrase a little bit and to redescribe the two options that he gave in the GitHub in order for us to pick the best one. So
yeah, surprise, surprise. This is again a matter of style. I had some experience with business service naming in the past, and if you look at it from a pure implementation perspective, you are inclined to use the verb noun tactic, but when you look at it from a business perspective, people usually talk in terms of we are in the business of driving permits, but around driving permits there are a lot of services there from a consumer perspective, or again in a more technical way of speaking, operations that you can do on that service. So my preference is the second one, but that might have an impact as well on the model. If we just say issue driving permit and we have another service called revoke or not. Issue an international driving permit or provide driving permit statistics to another consumed by another public administration, for instance, then you could keep the model as it is. But if you really would work with operations, with more general service naming like driving permits, and then different operations, that I think you might have to reflect that decision in the model, and not just with a serving naming convention. I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Bernard wants to add something. In general, it would be useful to have the opinions of the different people indeed on this. We'll see if we can gather that right now. But yeah, let's start with you, Bernard. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with Pascal. It's no simple issue. We have been big advocates of the first solution, and it's so far the one that is applied. So it's basically the title of the service is a phrase that is formulated from the user's perspective. And it's really clear for the users, but it's not the most readable format. For example, if you provide a list a big list of services, from an ergonomic point of view, it's kind of hard to read them all when you have so many words. And sometimes we also we also see that sometimes the verb is really not so useful to the comprehension, and it just adds noise to a big list of services, for example. So I'm kind of not really tackled on that issue from one side or another, and I would advocate to let it kind of open. I also see, for example, gov.uk, they don't really use so many verbs. They are really most like go straight to what the people will understand easily. And sometimes it's with a verb, and sometimes not. So kind of not really quite sure on the strategy, and I would advocate on leaving it kind of open to case by case.
Yeah. Any other reactions on this? Something we could do is also we can open a thread on GitHub to capture the different ways of. Well, there is a thread already created, but we could ask you to react on this by indicating your preferred way, because maybe without knowing, we have more similarities that we think, or yeah, we need to find that out, I think, before pushing for one or another. Would that be a short-term solution for you?
Yes, and the preference that we have with the noun can also be, I think, implemented by using the related relation on public service. So you could always say that issue driving or request driving permit is related also to provide driving permit statistics, and is so that could be, you could choose to do that and still use the model as it is now, I think. So and we shouldn't waste, I think that Bernard is also saying, waste too much time on fleshing the best way, fleshing out the best way of naming it.
Yeah, but so I will put in the chat the issue. So feel free if you have some comments, or if you want to describe your way of doing it and justify it, why, so that maybe there are useful lessons learned from one organization to another. Huh? That's what I mean. But I agree, Pascal, in general, and related to I think the first issue we discussed today, we will include the possibility to have several names per public service. So that's also something that is always possible. And I'm not sure that in the short term, or if it's even needed to have a harmonization of the names between all administrations. But yeah, that's something we can discuss on directly in the issue. Bernard, you want to conclude with something?
Oh yes, I would wanted to add something about the granularity, because I think the issue that Pascal raised also raises the question of when do we need to make it a specific public service, and when is it like a sub-operation of a public service? We, in our system, tend to regroup every operation under one service, and then you have links to, for example, pay your tax, and then make a recourse against the tax in the same kind of under the same service. But you can have different schools, and depending also on the context and on the service, you could have separate kind of instances of public service to describe that granularity also. But I don't think it's a problem. We should leave it open, but I'm stressing this because I think it's relevant to the conversation.
Yep. Good. Okay, but then based on the different examples and explanations given, we'll try to capture that in the notes and maybe add it on GitHub directly as support for the discussion. And for now, we don't try to solve this immediately, but we'll see if there are similarities between naming conventions, and if we can actually emphasize or recommend one way that could be a solution for the future in the specification. Good.
Okay, yeah. So maybe we can go to to breakout sessions. So basically we have foreseen here like 30 minutes of breakout sessions in order to discuss about the descriptions and the cardinalities of the model mainly. But since we are running a little bit out of time because we still have the public organization model to discuss, so we will ask you to deep dive about the cardinalities and descriptions directly on GitHub, and to raise your voice directly on GitHub, because we don't have currently the time to do it in breakout rooms. So I will just ask you to do it until the next workshop.
Yeah.
And now, yes.
Yeah, Louis, maybe just to add on this, yeah, we have foreseen some time to discuss, but it's really good that we discussed the different issues that were raised, and I think, yeah, thank you for that so far. And for the cardinalities and definitions or descriptions, you can find all proposed ones directly in the specification that Louis showed a bit earlier on the screen, and where the link is at the top of the chat. I can put it back. Voila. This is also valid for the public organization model, but we'll come back to that. So that's basically some homework for the coming 2-3 weeks, is to indicate if you have issues on GitHub with the cardinalities indicated in the specification now. So if you like to change, adapt them, or and the same for definitions.
Yes, and since some definitions are still a work in progress, don't hesitate to advise and to push for some definitions if you have good ones. Okay, so we'd like to have a break, 10 minutes break, until we go further into the public organization models. Thank you for all of you for your inputs, and see you in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
C'est vrai, je suis le seul. Tac. C'est bon. Ouais. Bon, ça a pris juste quoi, 2 heures au lieu de 30 minutes. Mais après, on le sent. Ouais, pour.
Great. I hope you had the time to relax your eyes from watching the screen during 2 hours.
Okay, so
Maybe, yeah, we can.
wait for a few more minutes. One minute.
Pascal didn't apparently. You catch up on phone calls and emails.
That's how it goes.
Yes, that's true. Okay, Louis, will you share back your screen?
Yes.
And the second half, not half, but the second part, tackling public organization, will be shorter, simply because we have discussed it a lot already in the previous webinar, and we haven't received that many issues in between the two webinars. So normally, let's see if we have many things to be discussed or additional things to be discussed on top of what we have planned.
Yes. So so here is first for public organization. I would like to remind you a little bit the modeling approach that we had. So basically, the scope of the public organization model was to define the terms and the vocabulary necessary and around the concept of public organization. And therefore, our working group is composed of representative of public organization and not all kinds of organization. And in order to build this kind of model, our source is CPOV, so Core Public Organization Vocabulary, made by the European Commission, and we added some concepts from the W3C organization ontology. So in these sources that are terms that are related solely to public organization, some of them concern all kinds of organizations. And basically, we have added some classes for this workshop in order to address that some terms that address all kind of organization and not also just the public organization one. But in this model, we have paid a lot of attention to distinguish the terms that are useful for all type of organization and not only to public organization, and the terms that are solely related to public organization, which is, as a reminder, a subclass of organization. So such elements that are related to all kind of organization are, as an example, address, contact points. But it's not in the scope of this workshop to tackle other kind of organizations that are not public organizations, such as private organization or other kinds of organization. And we would really like to remind you the scope and yeah, the baseline of our work in order to avoid further misunderstanding, since last time we had a lot of talking about what can be the differences between public organization and organization, and would like to yeah, really scope this the work on really public organization. So with that in mind, I will present the changes of the model of public organization. So now, as you can see, public organization is not at the center of this model anymore, and it's the organization class that is at the center, because as you pointed out in the previous webinar, a lot of classes that were and relationships that were previously linked to public organization can be linked at organization level. As an example, we had the contact point class that were previously linked to public organization, and that is linked to organization level. Same for change event. So we have really thought about what is distinctive of a public organization and what can be what classes are really at organization level. It can be seen for all types of organization. So that was the first thing, and also some linked between public organization with itself. As an example, sub-organization of and has sub-organization here was previously at public organization level, and we had moved up to organization level. And this kind of link is particularly interesting because last webinar, we had the issue that we might have different layers of organizational units. And since we have moved this relationship upper in the diagram, now, since organizational unit is a subclass of organization, we can, the model foresee the use case where you have different layers of organizational units. So yes, the first thing was really to put organization at the center, like a star model. The second addition was to add a site here, site class, because every organization has a site, can have one or more sites, and this site has an address. So basically, this was thanks to your input of the last webinar. And the two other classes that we added was post and role. So basically, a person related to an organization as a post and can one or more posts, and this post can have one or more roles. So I will just define it and take the example of myself. So my name is Louis, and my post is associate within my organization. It's my yes, the strict hierarchy where I am. And within this post, I can have one or more rules depending on the mission. So as an example here, one of my rule would be to facilitate a little bit this workshop, or also to model public organization and public service. So as you can see, a person can have one or more posts related to an organization, and related to this post, a person can have one or more rules depending on the context. So that was our addition here.
Maybe
yes,
any comment on this so far? I know that the screenshot is a bit small, so don't hesitate to also go directly to the visual online. I put the link in the chat. Yeah. And something that we all know and that Louis emphasized, of course, is through the subclass relationship between public organization and organization, all relationships pointing to organization are also valid for public organization. Bernard?
Yes, thank you for the work and the clarification here. I think it really goes in the right direction. So thank you for that. A couple of questions about the organization and the recursive relationships that are there. You have a sub-organization of has sub-organization, and you have member of and has member. So can you clarify the difference between the two? And also another remark is, okay, an organization can have several sites and then several addresses. It's conform to reality, but is it possible to qualify, for example, site, the relationship between site and organization to, for example, specify a preferred or default site and default address for an organization? I think it's it should be a valid use case.
Okay, so maybe we can add something to qualify a little bit the relation between organization and site, to address your second question. And Florian, can you answer the first one? So the difference between member of, as member relationship, and sub-organization of and has sub-organization.
Yeah, I was muted. I'm looking into the definition, so that that's, I think, the easiest way. And checking that, I see that in the spec, we are not defining at the moment is member of. So I'm going back to also CPOV, where this distinction is made. Let me also share the link in the chat. And maybe Louis, if you can go to it and show it on the screen, that would be the easiest for everyone. But basically, yeah, it's distinguishing the two simply by saying that you can be a member of an organization without actually being a sub-organization. So meaning that both organizations are still independent. And I think I can probably see a case where, for example, you are part of a network where legally both organizations are independent, but you are still part of that network. That's the how I understand the definition.
So basically, in has sub-organization, it's like a hierarchy, and has member is when you don't qualify yet the relationship.
Yeah, or you actually specify the fact that both organizations are really independent from a legal point of view. And how does that clarify?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. That's
Okay.
clear.
Any other reactions, or we can maybe move to the next slide, and in any case, we are still tackling the issues afterwards. Thanks, Bart, for the example in the chat. Yeah, let's
move on. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I mentioned, so we have now organization at the center and multiple classes related to all kind of organization, like contact point documents are now pointing it to organization. And as I mentioned also, we have it now at a multiple level of organizational units since it was raised last time. We also added site and we added post enroll, and we removed the qualification attributes that was previously in the model, attributes related to person. And also we have added all the cardinalities to all class and attributes. And we would like you in the breakout rooms later to take a look at them and to assess whether they make sense for you or not. But even if we have made quite a lot of changes in this model, we have still a few pending issues that needs to be addressed. So the first one here was whether a public organization, so which level of government a public organization responds to. So this issue was raised last webinar, where the issue was there was a public organization, and we wanted to know whether this public organization responds to the regional level, a federal level, or maybe a level below that. So we'd like to know whether it's covered by a legal resource, or maybe we should add a specific attribute for this. So can you Yeah, can I hear your voice on this first question, and we will go through the others afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah, for the level of government, when I have a look at the model, it's more like the administrative territorial units, no? Because legal resource, I think that's more to describe the mission or the common goal of the legal mandate of the public organization. But if it's really to know, oh, it's federal or it's a community competence, I think then you should have a look at the element name, administrative territorial units, no? Or am I mistaken?
I think in this case, but Louis, feel free to add anything. It's really to indicate, besides the sub-organization hierarchies, etc., it's in the end, is it an administration that is responding to regional level, to federal level, to any other level of authority? And it's true that within the ATU, we can indicate specific names for such levels. The question is, do we need to go beyond that? So maybe you're right, and with administrative territorial units, we could answer this. But this was coming also from a comment from the last webinar. Yeah, and I think Bernard, you made the comment, so maybe you have a specific case that you want to explain.
I wanted to react. I don't think the territorial unit model covers it all. In Belgium, as you know, we have very complicated institutions, and we have communities. I know that in the Flanders, it's kind of merged with regions, but in the French-speaking, it's still really strong. And communities, well, they don't really overlap with territorial units or as easily. So I'm advocating with a place in the model where you can specify the legal entity or the federal entity on the Belgian level to where an organization is situated. I think it would be very useful. Especially to us, where we have at least like 3 of those entities that we deal with. We have the Walloon region, we have the French community, and we have the German-speaking community also. And not having that information in the model would be very inconvenient.
From that aspect, I think we all agree on that. Adding an option in the ATU class to go beyond what is proposed at European level or in existing classifications at such levels, would that be a solution where basically we would have an extra classification on reusing as much as possible? So where we can, we reuse what exists at European level. If not, we develop our own classifications, or we reuse a classification at Belgian level. And I think last time in the webinar, but I would need to check again, there was some work on that at Belgian level. But yeah, Bart, maybe you have more details about it.
Yeah, well, the fun fact is, if you look into the ATU list published by the Publication Office, they already have an ATU for example, the Communauté Française, the Communauté Germanophone de Belgique, and Communauté Flamande. So they already made this distinction based on community, especially for us, I would say. It doesn't really, well, is correct with the others, but it's already in the published schema. The only thing, one of the things we need to investigate is they also provided provinces But if we want to go lower and say or talk about services or organizations down to the municipality level, then we have to find some additional thingies to use, I would say, or make our own taxonomy or thesauri and publish that on, for instance, belgium.be, and link that to the European vocabulary.
Exactly. So I think the way forward is we will document in the specification and share it with you as proposition some codes that are known, some code lists that are known and existing at European level. And if you have exactly such as Bart is doing, but that's the one of European office, I see, the publications office. If you have other classifications that you are using or that you are aware of at Belgian level, don't hesitate to indicate it on GitHub or to send it to us. That's also fine. And basically in the next webinar and also beforehand, we are in the stage where we need to deep dive in certain classifications, I think. So that's basically the way forward.
Yeah, and there are some very nasty corner cases that we also have to look into. I think it was especially tied to the German-speaking community, because some of the responsibilities they have, they decided that they wanted to proxy it or have it done by the region instead of the community, because they didn't have the manpower to actually provide the service. So if we really go deep into this kind of things, we really have to talk to all participants in all levels. So especially with the German-speaking community, because they're often, I wouldn't say ignore, but perhaps forgotten in many discussions.
Yeah, and probably I think the starting point is we propose codes and then we see how they should be applied and if by whom, and progressively we can refine them. Yeah. Bernard?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. ATUs, I just check. Of course, it's complete enough. And I agree with Bart for the German community. And I would say some of their competencies are proxied by the region, but it's also the other way around. So they have some regional competencies that they have with a cooperation agreement. They operate themselves. So it's quite tricky. I understand. I agree with that. And we are in close relationship with them for those things. I know they have limited resources, and I understand that this is why they're not part of this group. But we are in close relationship with them, and we can make a connection if needed.
Yeah, you can of course pass the word and share or with us a contact person. That would be of course also fine. Any reaction on this? I think we have the way forward, but we will make also the links in the specification towards existing codes explicit, so that it's easier for you to review and position yourself. And we'll also directly create an issue on GitHub for you to be able to comment easily.
Okay, great. Now we can go to the second issue. So our question is whether we should foresee multi-channel contact points as well as opening days. So if you remember correctly, in the model, we only have contact point, but we don't have a channel that is foreseen here. We have in the contact point class some attributes like as email, as phone, but we don't have a specific class like in the public service model. So our question is whether we should foresee a channel class in the public organization, as in the public service model, or maybe we should keep it as it is. Any reaction?
Yeah, Bernard?
I'm sorry, I'm just giving time for others to intervene. I don't want to be the one doing all the talking. I think we don't need all the channel setup that we made in the public service because here you talk about an organization, how to contact them, and I think something simpler could be enough. And I also think that most of the time you need to contact a public organization in relationship with the service they provide. I don't really see actually many use cases where you need to contact a public organization without the context of a service they provide. But I might be mistaken.
Okay, so according to you, we should keep it the model as it is.
Okay. Do you all agree with that? Maybe if not, you can put a -1 in the chat to vary a bit. Okay.
Okay. So I go to the next issue then. So in the public organization, we have an attribute type. So I go to the model. Here, as you can see, we have a type of public organization in order to classify it. And this attribute was added in the first webinar, but we don't have a definition of this attribute yet. And since it seems to be like a business requirement, would like you to maybe think a bit about what is the meaning of this attribute, what kind of classification of public organization we can bring, and yes, what kind of definition is the type has. So do
Is the
you
question
have
clear for everyone? Oh, sorry.
No. I was just going to maybe rephrase a little bit. So the question was, do you see any definition of the type attribute within public organization? Or do you see any use of this attribute?
So right now we have a type attribute within public organization. Should it be there? Should it be at organization level? And which kind of usage do you see for this classification or for this property, but probably with a classification behind? Yeah.
One use I see is the need to differentiate between public organization on the base of their nature, and it's specific to public organizations. You can have a public-owned company, and you can have what we say in French we say a public service organique, which is, for example, the core administration. Those are, you have a whole bunch of possible natures. You have agencies. And as I understand it, the type could be describing the nature of the entity, of the organization. Be able to discriminate between all those types on the basis of the nature.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can add this kind of definition.
Yep. And Anne is asking whether it should be defined at organizational level. But yeah, Anne, go ahead.
No, that's exactly my question, because it's for all organizations. You also have a type. So I wonder why it would be specifically for the public organization and not. I think it might be defined at the organization level.
Yes, definitely. The question is, are there classifications that are really specific for public organizations? But in any case, even if that is the case, we could define it at organization level and make it specific for public organizations if that's what is needed. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we move the type attribute to organization level, and we will give them the definition that you gave.
But should it be more generic, or putting a definition about the nature is sufficient or broad enough?
Are you going to use types of the Banque Carrefour des Entreprises, de Kruispuntbank voor Ondernemingen, CBE?
That's indeed, I think the example that Bernard gave about the nature, or and that's indeed the type used by KBO, right? So I think this should be the start, or could be the starting point if everyone agrees.
And in case that list of types is incomplete, you could also consider adding extra values, but I think it would be handy to just use that one.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. And yeah, you are anticipating the next slide, but you will see in a minute. Let's continue with the other points. I see some comments. Yeah, that it would be indeed a good idea also to publish such code list on vocab.belgif.be. But that's, I think, a general point for all classifications that we agree upon in this exercise. Right, Bert?
Yeah, indeed. For all things that could or should be centralized, we can just publish them. It's just we have to look into who is responsible. I think I'm not sure if it's the Banque Carrefour des Entreprises who comes up with the list, or maybe it's FPS economy, or it could very well be FPS justice to declare the list of valid types or government types. So remains to be seen.
Yep.
But indeed, general principle, if we need some centralized vocabulary that's not available at the European or whatever international level, let's make a taxonomy or thesaurus from it and publish it on vocab.belgif.be, because that's actually the main point of having that kind of site.
Yeah, to be transparent and at least so that everyone knows where to find it. And indeed, it's a valid point also that there are existing lists at global or international level. But maybe we can start with KBO and see also to what extent it's aligned with with international lists. I see Miguel, you raised your hand. Yeah.
With the mic, it will be better. As I am from KBO, but I am on the technical part, not the business part. We don't name the things. It will be probably from justice, indeed, yeah. If you have the different juridical form and things like that, it's more on the justice part than the KBO. We just take the data. We just exchange the data.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the addition. Okay. Do you want to add something, or is it just a?
No, it's I wanted to remove it.
Okay, no problem. And I see some discussions about renaming it to legal form. So the question is, of course, we could do that to make it more explicit. And then the question is, do we need a generic property such as type as it is now to cover any other classification of organizations or public organizations? Yeah.
For the legal form, it has a definition in itself. And you have all the kind of enterprise that are defined by a legal form. So I'm not sure it's exactly the same as you want, because a department of ministry would not have really a legal form. So I'm not sure if it's one-on-one what you want to say.
Yeah. See, Svetlana, you are in favor of type. So who is in favor of type to keep things, let's say, simple? Or do we need to be more specific? Any other reaction? Because I see Bernard, Anne, you were considering the legal form.
I was looking into ISNI, because ISNI is also their elements, and for the organization type, ISNI uses an ISO I2 institution types. So that's another list. It's really more generic names like, oh, this is an academic library, this is an archive, this is an association. So it's really specific for, creative organizations. So it's, I don't know if this NISO list organization type would be useful. I think if it's really specifically for Belgian organizations, then I would stick to the CBE.
Can you, in any case, share the link with everyone? Yeah, Mana.
I understand the remark that Miguel just made about some sub-organizations that don't have a legal personality. So we would need to, in any way, reconcile this reality with what is expressed in the model. So probably that the SPF justice categorization is a little bit too narrow to describe the whole reality, because we would need at least one more type of organization, which is no legal form or no legal personality, for example. But otherwise, I don't have an opinion on the naming.
Okay, so we adapt it to legal form, or I have the impression that the majority, and we see what which exact code list we use behind it. But we'll also make a GitHub issue for that, so that you can share your opinions and react on the code list. Thanks, Anne, for the link. Do you have also the reference to the KBO list? And in the meanwhile, I think we can also move to the next point, Louis.
Yes. So basically, the last point was what element is really distinctive of a public organization, and what we thought is 3 things. So first one, a public organization as opposed to a global organization as a legal resource that gave the public organization a mandate, a legal base to exist. Second thing is administrative territorial unit, so a jurisdiction where the public organization has some power. And the third one, as a model in the schema, is 2 attributes, so the alternative and preferred label. Of course, the 2 last attributes can be moved to organization, but we wanted to make sure that do you agree with the elements that are distinctive of a public organization? And if not, just don't hesitate to raise your voice, and we will make some changes. So do you agree with these 3 elements distinctive of a public organization? Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the third one, because I didn't really understand what you meant?
So I'll come back to the model. It will be a little bit better. So as you can see in the public organization, we have 3 attributes. So first one was, as we discussed, type, and we will move it to organization. And the 2 others is alternative label and preferred label. So basically, it's the name of a public organization. And so the preferred label was really the legal name of a public organization, was alternative label was more like a user-friendly name of a public organization. And so in the model, it's distinctive of a public organization. It's not at the organization level. And we wanted to know whether these attributes are at the public organization level, or maybe it might be better to move them at an organization level. I hope it's more clear.
Yes, thank you.
So do you agree that we keep those attributes at the level of public organization?
If I can keep the floor, I would say that the first 2 really qualify as specific to public organization and are really needed. The third one, the labels, I really don't see why they wouldn't be a part of the organization model, because you can have labels and alternative labels to any organization, to my opinion.
Yep.
Okay, does everyone agree to move alternative label and preferred label to organization level? Don't hesitate to comment a +1 if you agree on the chat.
Yep. And one Hilde as well. Okay, but it's yeah.
The only question I have, if you move all the alternative label and the type and the preferred label all to organization, then we have nothing left to specify what a public organization is. Should there be some link between public organization and the legal mandate or legal resource?
And that's where we could make an example, but by the subclass relationship, everything that is defined at organization level is also true for public organization, meaning that voilà.
Okay. Yeah.
So the only thing is, by putting everything that's within organization, or in other words, by putting organization at the center of this model, we could argue at a certain point, what are we trying to define? And as mentioned by Louis a couple of minutes ago, the scope of this work is really to define what is specific for public organizations. So yeah, an external reader could say at the end, but you are describing organizations more than public organizations. It's true because we define a lot of terms at the organization level, but it's true still, I think the scope is for public organizations, because there are extra terms for organizations that we are not including here. Do you agree? But in general, I think, did we cover all the issues? I think we covered all of them for public organization.
Yes, indeed. So maybe we can move on to the next slide. Yes. So basically here, it's information collected by Banque Carrefour des Entreprises in French, or KBO in Dutch, for organization. So this is all the fields or the attributes necessary to describe an organization for BCE. And as you can see here, highlighted in green, it's the field that is already in the public organization model that we have built together, and not highlighted, it's the attributes that are not in the model yet. So we would like your view on whether do you agree on the terms that are already in the model, and do you think we need more attributes to be added that are not yet in the model? So do you have a point of view on that? Yes.
Miguel, go ahead. You're muted. Yeah.
Sorry. The ex officio deregistration, I don't think it can happen to a public service. So except if we have a part that is done by a commercial enterprise and you have given the task to do it, maybe, but I think it have no interest. But we sometimes enter data in place of the owner of the enterprise because it didn't did its job. So that may be having the idea that it's a forced entry, but I am not sure it will have some interest in the big schema.
So your point, Miguel, is in general that the list here is not for public organizations.
For ex officio, the registration, I'm pretty certain that's certain. Approval authorization, that's the load, so that's maybe it's interesting. Economic activity, it's the field of activity. I don't know if we put them for the public element, I must admit. Legal form, that's yes. Type, I don't think it will ever be a natural person, because that would mean it's a person that does it in its own name. So I have a big, I'm pretty sure it has no meaning. Status, if it's the company is active or not, that's interesting. Capacities, not sure. Capital, I don't think it has any interest. Duration of the entity, it's in the status, so I don't think for us, for the people, it will be have an interest. That of the end of the accounting, that's the financial data. Once again, I don't think it it has something to do with the public organism. That of the ordinary, it's also financial, so it has no meaning. Link for the database, I suppose then that's for the public search. It can have meanings that should have been discussed. And start that date of this data, yes.
Thanks for the overview. It would actually, with the recording, we could also put it, but be useful to have that on GitHub or via email, your input on this list. Any other reactions compared to what Miguel said?
I would have to ask the business to confirm what I just said, because once again, technical, not business.
Yeah, but thanks for the input, and yeah, if you can get someone to confirm or add some extra information and share it with us, that would be useful. Yeah, Anne?
Yeah, the enterprise number, the company number or enterprise number, I think it's useful as well. Because, for instance, KBR, we have this, we have that number as well, and public organizations, they also send out purchase orders, or so it's a very good way to identify in a machine readable way the organization. Sometimes, if I want to know, for instance, if a certain if certain entity, what it responds to or where it belongs to, then the company number often gives valid information.
Yeah, and I see that Miguel agrees in the chat.
The company number, I didn't speak about it because yes, it's for us it's the ID. If you don't have it, you don't have anything.
Yeah. Besides, it's also it's obligatory to mention the ondernemingsnummer, this company number, on each publication. So on a website, if you have a website as a public organization, you should also mention it. It's mandatory information.
The big question is, I think it's at the level of organization, right, and not public organization, but that's something we should include. And in the case of that Bernard described earlier, for example, the federal government or the public entities that have no legal forms, how would we cover that? Meaning that we don't make the company number mandatory? You see what I mean?
I just took a look at, for instance, Literatuur Vlaanderen, which responds to the Ministry of Culture, but it's a separate organization. They have like an enterprise number as well. I don't know if that was one of the examples you were thinking of, but...
Yeah, like ministries, do they have specific company numbers themselves, or?
The answer it depends.
Yeah.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Either they have their own KBO number, enterprise number, or unit number, or they act under the number of the ministry. It really depends on how it was made by the organization.
But there is always a number somewhere, basically.
At least, yes, they are part of a bigger organization, and that bigger organization should have a number or be part of a bigger that has a number. Yes, always. Yeah.
Okay, so we can have this attribute as mandatory.
I see other hands raised. Yeah, Bernard and Bart. Bernard?
I don't think the number should be mandatory because if you have a sub-entity of a sub-organization of an organization, well, the number, I agree that there is always a company number at the top. I don't see any use case where you don't. But if you want to describe with more granularity all the sub-entities, we have hundreds of organizations that would put in that model that don't have on their own a company number. They just depend on a tree of dependencies where at the top you have a number. But I don't think, I think it would be confusing to add that company number to all of the sub-entities. And I don't think it's the purpose of the model.
And it's true that I think we should be able to describe different organizations and sub-organizations, and some of them may not have company numbers. So we get, from that perspective, we cannot make it mandatory. Because if we make it mandatory at organization level, it will, all the subclasses will also inherit and will have to provide a company number. Or either a workaround would be to provide the same company number, but does that make sense? I'm not sure. Bart, you wanted to react? You are muted. If not Bart, I see a question from Johan in the chat about what is the definition of an organization. Let me put it in the chat directly, and Miguel, you can.
I was on mute. I'm sorry. But indeed, exactly that. I think that's also why we end up internationally with the W3C org and the W3C registered organization. So we will definitely have organizations that do not have their own number. And there was at one point in time a suggestion to create a working group on how to publish machine readable organizational charts so that we could start at the highest level, let's say, from something that's listed in the Banque Carrefour des Entreprises, or des Entités. Actually, their entities, not always enterprises. And that by connecting those information with something that could be published on a specific place or via linked data, whatever, blah, 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 that we could document the relationship between, let's say, the ad hoc or the sub-organizations and the main organization that might or that should always have some kind of number attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does everyone agree with that? Yeah. And sorry, before that, Miguel, you also raised your hand.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that Bernard is totally true. We have a lot of problem with sub entity to know where they are and who they are. It's a problem, for example, with Vlaanderen, because they have a big organization with a lot of little things behind it, and each little thing has right at KBO to do things or not. So it's not always evident to distinguish the little part of the organization by that number, that's certain. And it means also it will be not unique, because small part can have the same number then, yeah.
Yep. So do we agree that we include this part? For the others, let's, Miguel, if you can share your input, and then we will make that as a proposition on GitHub for the others to react. That would be useful. But for company number, if I summarize what we have discussed, we could include it under the class organization as an optional class property. Sorry, and in the usage note we can document, we can describe the fact that we advise to use it if, or more than advice, we ask people to indicate it if there is one, but if not, it's why it would be optional. The company number would not be needed. Do you agree with that proposition?
Don't hesitate to have +1 in the chat.
Yeah, I see that unreacted. Miguel, Hilde, yeah. Okay, but then let's proceed like this.
Okay, yeah, so we, same as public service, we have foreseen like breakout session for 30 minutes, but since we are already late, so I would propose to you to, same as public service, to have a look at cardinalities and definition of the public organization model as a homework in GitHub. Because yeah, we don't have any time left in order to do that. But of course, we will come back to you about the proposed cardinalities and definitions on the next working group session.
Yeah, but so to wrap up for today, we will come back to you with the notes of today's meeting. Thanks a lot for all the interactions. And in next to the notes, we'll also include a short list of, okay, what kind of reviews can you provide, can you conduct? And this will be really useful in preparation of the next webinar in a month's time. I don't know, Louis, if you can move forward also
Yes.
to directly have the date. So next webinar, the fourth webinar is planned on the 7th of October in a month. So please make sure to already save the date on your agenda. And why is it important that ideally you take some time to review the cardinalities and definitions beforehand and provide some input so that during the next webinar we can really agree on and close down all the points that will be raised by then, so that right after we can really start the public review period. But the idea is to have a really stable version of each model right after the next webinar. Voilà, so that's for wrapping up for today. Are there any pending questions or remarks that you have? Feel free to share right now, or if you have also feedback on the way we structure or run the webinars, also feel free to share it via email, and that's of course also fine. So if there is no, yeah, okay. Thanks, Bernard, and thank you all for the contribution today. It was yet again a 3-hour webinar. We always try to plan it shorter, but because of and that's really good, because of all the discussions, we usually take the 3 hours. So thanks a lot for that, and we see each other in a month's time.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.